let's paint some fun, simple holly leaves and with some other things. All right, first, let's draw our holly leaves. I'm going to be using two different greens, a lighter green and a darker green, or kind of a warmer green and a cooler green. It's nice to have two different greens to work with so you can drip in those shadows because we're going to use wet on wet technique for this. I'm using my lighter green to start by drawing 1/2 of the holly leaf and filling it in with wet paint. I'm drawing half of it at a time so that I can leave a nice white line down the middle for a vein. Since we're doing wet on wet, if we don't want any areas to bleed together, they need to have space between them. So that little white line in the middle will act as my vein and a barrier for the colors. Now I'm taking my darker green and I'm drawing along the edges. Now be careful doing this because wherever you lift up your brush, that's where the color will bloom or spread the most. So I tried to keep my brush down on the paper for as long as possible, only lifting up at the ends, and that way it doesn't bleed all across the middle and I still get my two different values. Let's do this again for the rest of the holly leaves. For some little berries, we're just going to draw some little circles with our red paint, filling in everything but a little white dot. That little white dot will act as the highlight. Again, we're using the white of our paper to make part of our painting. So just like the veins in the leaves, these berries have a little white highlight that we've left the white of the paper. You can drip in some darker value like I did there too for a bit of shadow, but no big deal. Again, we're staying with simple designs. Now I'm going to try to do a pine cone, but again, very simple. I'm just going to create a few rows of dotted, wiggly, uneven brown marks. And those rows are going to get narrower and narrower to go to the point of the pine cone. So I'm trying to create this kind of generic teardrop shape made out of rows of wiggly dots. That's as simple as I'm making this pine cone. Pine cones can get as detailed as you want, but it's great to break them down into basic shapes and squiggly lines. I decided I wanted one more holly leaf, so you can add as many as you want, same technique as before. Light green first with a wet on wet, so then you can add your dark green into it while it's still wet, tracing those edges. Now I wanted to balance this composition, so I'm adding another pine cone over here on this side, but it's going to be mostly covered up by this holly leaf. So I'm only doing kind of one side of the pine cone, still thinking about those rows of dots, and that way it's kind of hidden. Having overlapping details is a great way to improve your composition. I like to speed up the drying process with my heat gun, but you can always just wait for it to dry too. Next, we're going to be using our pen to do some basic outlining. I'm using my Micron pen. This is a 0.5. You can use whatever size tip makes sense for the size of your drawing. I'm just loosely tracing around the edges of each shape, adding a little line on those leaves, again, to highlight to show where that vein is. And I'm keeping my lines loose. It's okay if I don't perfectly trace the holly leaf. We're going for a simplistic illustrative style. On the pine cones, I'm creating some sort of wiggly shapes or lines around those edges, just defining those rows a bit more, not trying to trace each shape on its own. And then it's always fun to throw your little signature in the corner, even a small illustration, and there you have it. Super simple, easy, quick holly leaves, even some pine cones and berries to enjoy this winter. Happy painting!